So, when America jumped into World War I back in 1917, it wasn't just about shipping soldiers off to Europe. Not even close. It was actually one of the biggest, messiest, and, frankly, most revealing social experiments in the country's history. And it all forced the nation to answer a really tough question.
And that question is really the core problem we're talking about today. See, the United States had just declared war on Germany, a massive military power. But its own army, well, let's just say it was not exactly ready for prime time.
I mean, think about it. America's got this huge ocean separating it from the front lines, and its military is just a tiny fraction of what the European powers had. It was an army of volunteers, kind of built for smaller scale fights from a totally different era. It was absolutely not prepared for the industrial scale meat grinder that was the Great War.
So, this story we're diving into, it's not just about battles and strategy. No, it's really the story of how this frantic rush to war basically held up a giant mirror to America. And what it saw in that reflection was everything. Its greatest strengths, its absolute ugliest divisions, and a shocking ability to change on a dime. Okay, so let's dig into just how big this problem was. On April 4th, 1917, the day war was declared, the difference between what America wanted to do and what it could actually do was, well, it was massive. What you're seeing here is a total clash of ideas about what an army should even be. On one side, you've got the European powers with their huge, permanent armies and a system where they could call up millions of trained reserves in a flash. That's conscription. But the U.S., totally different. It had a small professional army and this deep-seated tradition of relying on volunteers. It's a night and day difference, and it left America, well, pretty exposed. And you gotta understand, this wasn't just some abstract policy debate. It was baked into the American identity. You had influential guys like labor leader Samuel Gompers, basically saying that forcing people into the army was just un-American. The whole idea was that a republic should be able to rally its people voluntarily. A nice thought, right? But World War I was about to prove that hope was definitely not a strategy.
So, yeah, it became obvious and fast that just asking for volunteers wasn't going to cut it, not for this kind of war. A modern industrial war needs a modern industrial-sized army. And to get there, the U.S. had to do something it had always hated the idea of, a nationwide draft.
And the speed at which this happened is just mind-blowing. Seriously, in less than 2 months from declaring war to passing the Selective Service Act, the entire approach changed. It was a massive, seismic shift in policy, and it happened in what felt like the blink of an eye.
Now, this new Selective Service Act was smart. It was designed to avoid the mistakes of the past. Remember the Civil War draft? It was super unpopular because rich guys could literally pay someone else to go fight for them. This new system was meant to be way more fair. It was run by local draft boards, and because of that, people mostly went along with it, even though everyone was worried about massive resistance at first.
But here's where things get really interesting. Building this giant army had all these side effects that nobody planned for. The first big one, the draft accidentally became this enormous project to collect data on the American people. For the very first time, the government got this incredibly detailed snapshot of the health of millions of its young men.
And the scale here, it's just staggering. 2.5 million men were examined by the Army Medical Department. Just let that number sink in. It was, without a doubt, the biggest public health survey the country had ever seen. And what they found was a huge shock to the system. A really big chunk of those 2.5 million men were actually found to be unfit for service. And get this, the most surprising part was that over 1/3 of the rejections were for things like neurological, psychiatric, or mental health problems. It was this stunning moment that suddenly dragged these hidden public health issues right out into the open. And the screening wasn't just physical. Oh no. The Army also rolled out the first ever mass intelligence tests, giving them to about 1.9 million recruits. They even had 2 versions, the Alpha test for guys who could read and write English, and the Beta test, which was all visual, for those who were illiterate or didn't speak English.
This, however, is where all that data collection takes a really dark turn. The guy who designed the tests, a psychologist named Robert Yerkes, was a big believer in eugenics, this awful pseudoscience about improving the human race through selective breeding. He took this flawed test data and used it to push a really ugly, prejudiced agenda. He claimed the results proved the average American soldier had the mental age of a 13-year-old, and that immigrants from places like Southern and Eastern Europe were just naturally less intelligent. Of course, we know now the tests were completely biased. They were really just measuring how much schooling someone had, not their actual intelligence. It's a pretty chilling reminder of how easily data can be twisted to back up racism.
So you have this draft pulling millions of men from every corner of the country, all walks of life, and throwing them together. You think that might break down some barriers, right? Well, not exactly. In a lot of ways, it just made the country's deep social divisions even worse, especially when it came to race.
For black leaders at the time, people like the incredible W.E.B. Du Bois, the war seemed like a huge opportunity. The thinking was pretty powerful. If black men serve, fight, and die for America right alongside white soldiers, then how could the country possibly keep denying them their basic rights as citizens? It was this idea that military service could be a direct path to proving their patriotism and finally demanding true equality.
But the reality was just crushing. All that hope ran smack into a wall of prejudice. The War Department enforced strict, absolute segregation. The vast majority of black soldiers were completely barred from combat roles. Instead, they were stuck in labor units, basically treated like second-class citizens while wearing the nation's uniform. The Army wasn't some great equalizer. It was just a mirror reflecting the ugly, systemic racism of Jim Crow America.
Meanwhile, as all these men are being drafted, women are stepping up in a huge way. They're mobilizing at home and even overseas, taking on brand new roles that completely challenged what society thought women could do, and proving just how essential they were to the entire war effort.
I mean, this war opened doors for women that had been slammed shut for centuries. For the first time ever, women could actually enlist in the Navy and Marines. They were called yeomen, and they handled all this vital clerical work. Then you had the legendary Hello Girls, these bilingual telephone operators who were absolutely crucial for communications on the front lines. And on top of all that, you had thousands serving as nurses and doctors, and millions more volunteering for everything under the sun, basically keeping the country running.
But just like with race, it wasn't a simple story of progress. For every step forward, these women ran into a brick wall of institutional sexism. Take nurses and doctors. They had these critical skills, but they were denied military commissions. They weren't officers. This put them in this weird, vulnerable position with no real authority or protection. It wasn't about prestige, it was about safety. And for black women, the door wasn't just closed, it was slammed in their face. They were completely barred from serving as military medical staff and were pushed into separate, segregated units within civilian organizations. So when you pull back and look at the big picture, this huge, chaotic mobilization did way more than just build an army. It really did act like that mirror we talked about, forcing the entire country to take a long, hard look at itself.
In a way, the whole process was like a national physical. It took the country's temperature, checked its health, its level of education, and it also diagnosed its deepest prejudices and social fractures. What it revealed was a nation that could pull off incredible things, but at the same time was still deeply sick with the diseases of Jim Crow racism and systemic sexism.
Look, there's no question that America built an army that helped win the war. But the process of doing that changed America forever. It dug up all these uncomfortable truths and unleashed social forces that would directly fuel the fights for civil rights and for women's right to vote for decades to come. So the real question isn't just about how they built a winning army. It's about what kind of nation they built in the process.